You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz, and joining me today is Jill Waterman.
Hey, Alan. Great to hear your voice.
Ditto. Let's have some fun here today.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the cool parts of the show is hearing from listeners, especially when they have great stories to share. Today, we're excited to speak with Jaymi Heimbuch, a conservation photographer and founder of the Conservation Visual Storytellers Academy. Jaymi's organization features both online instruction and a dedicated membership community. Jaymi reached out to us through our podcast hosting service, Libsyn, introduced us to her work, and pitched being a guest on the show. Boom! What do you know? She's with us today. Whoever thought it'd be that simple? Sometimes you just have to ask, and you get what you need. Jaymi's website, the Conservation Visual Storytellers Academy, is a treasure trove of inspirational content along with useful tools for anybody seeking to learn about conservation photography. Think this makes for a good show? Wait, there's more. In keeping with listener requests to include the voices and imagery of emerging photographers on the show, after a short break, we're going to be joined by Anne Readel, one of Jaymi's former students who has achieved rapid success and a boatload of bylines since first picking up a camera in 2019. Now for some biographical background. Jaymi Heimbuch is a writer, a naturalist, a wildlife conservation photographer, and founder of the Conservation Visual Storytellers Academy. Her drive for pursuing stories that stir folks to action is matched only by her joy in helping others achieve similar goals. A prime example of her multi-passionate approach to storytelling is the Urban Coyote Initiative conducted from 2014 to 2020. Working alongside both scientists and local communities, her paparazzi-style documentation helped eliminate the mystery and misconceptions about these wild animals who live amongst us. Based on the Oregon coast, Jaymi is a firm believer in that knowledge is for sharing and the most important work lies ahead. Anne Readel fell in love with photography after holding a magnifying glass up to her iPhone so she could take a close-up picture of a bird near her home in Wisconsin. This was about 3 or so years ago. For the record, Anne is a practicing intellectual property law attorney for a biotechnology company. She's also a former field biologist with a PhD in conservation biology and spent 9 years working on fish, reptile, and amphibian conservation projects in Illinois, Canada, and Uganda. To better understand how to use a camera and up her game, Anne enrolled in Heimbuch's Conservation Photography 101 course, where, among other things, she learned to craft and pitch stories on conservation subjects. In case you're wondering, she's also transitioned to mirrorless cameras since that time she held that magnifier up to her smartphone, and that's a good thing. Anne's work has since been published by the New York Times, Audubon, Sierra Club, Better Homes and Gardens, to name a few. Welcome to the show, Jaymi, and welcome, Anne.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a joy to be here.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. So let's start off some questions here, and the first one's going to be for Jaymi. First of all, what is conservation photography? Are there myths and misconceptions that people have about this field? What is it?
Well, it's a niche that's been around for a while. Christina Mittermeier really gave it a name, even though conservation has been an outcome of photography since, the dawn of the technology. It really didn't have a name for people who focus specifically in on using photography as a means to affect positive change. So what conservation photography is really about using the images that you create to bring awareness, attention, understanding, importantly, action around environmental issues and conservation issues. So it's not really necessarily a certain style or a certain approach to how you create your images or a certain technique. It's really about putting your images to work to create positive change for conservation issues that you care about.
Thinking about what you're saying, and I'm thinking about conservation photography, just the whole concept of it, there's a very fine line between pretty pictures of flowers and frogs and toads and salamanders and snakes and all this stuff, and photographs of these same things that are trying to get a message about conservation. And where is that line, and how do you tie the two together?
Yeah. I love that you asked that question because that's the beauty of conservation photography is that there isn't necessarily anything in the visual itself. Sometimes there is. Sometimes you're really zeroing in on creating very storytelling images where there's a very clear message going on. You're showing the reality of something. Joel Sartore has a very famous quote that a nature photograph is a picture of a butterfly on a flower, and a conservation photograph is that same butterfly on a flower but with a bulldozer coming at it. So in one sense, that's true, right? Like that can be a very story driven photo that has a message. But at the same time, that original photo, the butterfly on the flower, can have a really strong conservation impact if you're using it in a way that can bring that attention. So that might be within a written story. It might be maybe in an exhibit that has messaging around it, bringing attention to an issue. I mean, Anne, we'll hear from her in a moment about one of her stories that features the cutest little bumblebee butt as it flies towards a flower, but that's within a larger story about pollinator protection and bringing awareness to pollinator species. So you're right, there is a very fine line, and I think that really the power of conservation photography is it doesn't have to look like one thing. It's really about what you do and the message that you bring alongside your images to have that impact.
See, something that comes to mind for me that's directly related to this is that I know in the past few months, I've seen a lot of things about monarch butterflies, which are greatly endangered, and I've been in love with them for a great part of my life. I've raised them from caterpillars, and my kids and grandkids do the same thing. I've passed it along. And I know that right now they're greatly endangered, and there is a great movement where if you send away, they'll send you seeds for milkweed, which is the only thing that the caterpillars eat. That's their sole food, and it's being wiped out by pesticides and bulk farming. So this is the one way that they're getting around. So they're sending up beautiful pictures of beautiful butterflies, but there's a message there and also a call to action.
Yes.
Send a call for free. We will send you seeds that you plant, and you will help these things get along on your way.
Yes, that call to action is huge. Absolutely.
It also seems, Jayme, that it's reinforced by a belief system that the photographer or visual storyteller has. Does that factor in?
Oh, I truly believe so. That's a really great point, Jill. So many of my colleagues in the field, the students that I work with, people that I meet who care about conservation photography, it's not necessarily, or it's really not at all about just the glory of creating amazing images that people fall in love with. It's also about having your images have meaning and purpose and doing something important with your images. And ultimately, that's why I got into conservation photography as well. I was really into wildlife photography, and I'm out there taking tons and tons of images, but they're all just kind of piling up in an archive. And I thought, what am I contributing to the world? Why am I really doing this? And then conservation photography entered my view, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's it. That provides me with this amazing sense of purpose that I can be giving back or making a positive impact on the very species and places that I love through this work that I already enjoy, this passion I already have for photography. So I do think that there is an ethos in there that all conservation photographers have, in that it's about more than the image. The image is a tool, but there's more that we do with that.
Yeah. So with that in mind, why don't you give us a quick synopsis of the Conservation Visual Storytellers Academy?
Thank you. Yeah. So Conservation Visual Storytellers Academy is, I started it in 2021, and it is home to our courses and programs that are made for nature photographers and filmmakers who have a love for science and conservation and really making an impact with their work. And all of our courses and programs are designed around helping them build really strong visual storytelling skills and the skills that they need to be able to get their work out there in the world where it can make an impact. So that includes online courses, and we are going to bring back some in-person programs. Finally, we do week-long workshops out in the field with people as well. So those will be coming back hopefully very soon.
That's exciting. Wow.
One of the things I kind of got giggle out of is that you have a little quiz that you give on your website, and it talks about your work style. And I realized halfway through it, this is a very sneaky thing. You're trying to make me take up a cause that's very socially responsible.
Well, I didn't realize I was being sneaky, but now I feel very mischievous. But yes, I have a quiz that I created, and it really is the intention behind the quiz is to help you figure out your visual storytelling style. So, or like that personality type that you bring. And through years of working with now hundreds of photographers, I really noticed that there's kind of like these four main umbrella personalities or these ways of really viewing your work that people tend to fall into. So I wanted to create a quiz that helps you figure out what that is. And then at the end of the quiz, you get a breakdown of kind of the overarching personality traits, some of the challenges that you're likely to come up against, and then tools to really start to take action.
How did you come up with the questions for the quiz?
Well, that is where I feel a little bit sneaky. I tried to, I tried to create questions that would be fun to answer, but still really get at the heart of each of the traits. So, like one of the questions is, if you were an animal, which animal would you be? And so there's, a choice between a bee or a hummingbird, a caribou or river otter, and it's because those animals, each of them embody a certain trait that pops up inside one of these larger personality types. So I really sat down and thought about like, what if you were in these different scenarios or you were being asked these different things, what would you be most likely to say if you were this personality or this one or this one or this one? There's four total personalities. And it took a while, honestly, to come up with it because I really put a lot of thought and analysis into it. But I'm glad that I did because I hear from a lot of the quiz takers that they're kind of freaked out at how accurate their result is. So it feels like I kind of nailed it on that. Makes me happy.
It was uncomfortable. I actually felt uncomfortable a few times because it made me admit to a few things that, I do procrastinate and I do have a lot of excuses for not doing things. But what really bothered me the most is that I identified most with hummingbirds, but the description of the otter, I think, fit me better. And I'm still having a problem, like, coming to grips with this. I really am.
Well, we'll have to make a hybrid of like a humming otter that you can be.
So what are the four types of storytellers?
Well, I could reveal that, or I could encourage people to go take the quiz.
Sure.
But I'm more than if you want to dig into it, I'm more than happy. I'm not that sneaky of a person, I promise.
Well, more importantly, after someone has taken the quiz, how do you suggest that they, put what they've discovered into action?
Yeah. So each result page has a few resources. One of them is a curated selection of podcast episodes that would be most helpful to that person. So, for example, one of the results is you're an explorer. And for the explorers, one of the big personality traits is really feeling motivated and fired up to get started on projects. And so I have a curated set of podcast episodes that helps you dig into a project or helps you get started and find something to work on. And so that's one element of it. But I also provide a path to impact map maker, which is basically a workbook, because a lot of what goes into these personality types, it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm really great at taking these types of images, or I'm very tech savvy or whatever. A lot of it really is about mindset. And so the workbook helps you get really clear on where your mindset might help you, where it might hold you back, and then how to get started, how to really move forward with one big idea, how to find that idea that helps you get started on a project or a story or something you want to do. So there's quite a few resources that, depending on how you like to learn, or whether that's written or audio, there's something there for you that you can take these personality traits and hit the ground running.
I think something that's also interesting about the program that you're running and the goals that you're after is that to do this as a photographer, if you really are juiced by this and you want to participate, you don't have to deal with endangered species that are hard to get at or extremely dangerous. Because pretty much no matter where you live, there's something going on that you can get involved in. There are threatened species pretty much anywhere on the planet right now. And it could be animals, it could be plants, it could be a number of things. It could be physical structures, it could be environmental, something geographic. That a lot of these things can be tied into this, and it's all local. And if you understand where you live and you're familiar with the stories of where you live, and it's easy to get involved in this on any level.
I am so glad that you said that. And it's really true. I think one of the big myths that is wrapped up inside of conservation photography is, people might look at it and think, oh, well, it's all about endangered species and protecting rainforests. And yeah, that is a critical part of it. But conservation is really so many other things. And no matter where you are in the world, there are conservation stories happening right outside your door. But importantly, also, conservation is critical not only for species or places that are under threat, but it's critical for the species that aren't yet threatened but could be. So even I really strongly believe that even common species, your favorite species, whatever it may be, that can be part of conservation messaging, because conservation also is a mindset. It's about thinking about our impact on nature, on the environment around us, on the planet as a whole. And so things like making your yard pollinator friendly, or helping people understand how to coexist with species that might concern them. That might even be, spraying for insects around your house. There's all kinds of ways that conservation matters, and that no matter where you are in the world, if you love nature photography and you care about conservation, there's a project or a story or something waiting for you to take it on.
It's a really good point. I believe on your site you had an article about, I think it was called No-Mow May, where for the month of May you don't mow your lawn. That's when the pollinators start calling. And I never thought about that, but it's true. And I know that quite often I would mow around the clover because, first of all, I love clover, the smell of it and the sight of it. And there's always pollinators all over them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that article that you're referencing is Anne's article. She made a huge impact with it.
It hit me big. And yeah, this is something that I'm definitely going to take up. I think it's a great, easy thing to do. I mean, it's effortless, literally.
Yes. Yeah, literally. You do nothing and you're helping.
We're going to talk with Anne about that article in the second half of the show. But for right now, I'm curious, Jayme, in the development process, when you're working with students on putting together a photo story, how early in the process do you recommend that they start writing about the work that they want to do and the images they want to make?
Well, the great thing about working as a photographer is even if you're photographing a story, you don't necessarily have to write that story. You can definitely pitch what's called a photo text package where you're the writer and the photographer on it, but you don't have to. And so for a lot of the students that I work with who are like, I have zero interest in writing stories, they're off the hook. They just have to focus on learning how to write their pitches and to really clarify their story, but they don't have to write that article. But a lot of students do really enjoy writing alongside their photography. And in fact, one of my students, I loved it. He told me, I never thought I was going to write anything, but he just pitched his first photo story and it was a yes. And it's a personal essay that he's written. And he's like, all of a sudden I'm a writer. I can't believe this. And so I think that part of it is if you have an interest in writing your stories, then there's a big opportunity out there for you, because it not only gives you a chance to really tell a story in a way that you're more involved in, but it also opens the door for more opportunities, because a lot of publications do like having stories that are written by the photographer as well. There's opportunity there if you want to be the writer. So I don't necessarily focus on when in the process you really start writing. I focus in on getting really clear on the story that you're creating with your images, getting really clear on what it is that you're pitching for publication or how it is that you're going to get that out into the world. And then at that point, you can figure out what kind of writing you really want to do with that. There's something that I teach called the 3 A's. So in conservation photography, one of our big drivers is affecting action and change. And so I like to really have people think about, when you're looking at your story, first think about what kind of action do you want to have? Like, what action do you want people to take, or what impact do you want to have? Then you think about, okay, if I want to have that effect, what audience do I need to get this in front of? And then once you're clear on who you need to get that in front of in order to have that effect or that impact, then you can think about the shape that the story will take, or the way that you're going to write that. So I really like to think about, let's go in some ways backwards. Start with that effect you want to have, then figure out who you need to get in front of, then figure out that story. And I think that that can really help with photographers who want to do the writing, because it doesn't seem so big and scary like they're starting with a blank page. They're already starting out with ideas in mind for what they need to write and how. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So there was somewhere on your site that I read that you had tips for reverse engineering a photo story. Is that where this comes in?
A bit, yeah. So when I think about reverse engineering a photo story, I like to think about take a look at a photo story that you think is done really well and look at the images that are in that photo story. Why did those images work so well? What's going on with them? How do they play off of each other? How do they tie into the text? So that's really kind of like a creative exercise to start to hone your photography skills. And then the 3 A's tie into really thinking about the overall effect that that photo story will have. And you're right, in a way, sort of reverse engineer that path that you want to take.
So what about once you have sort of the essence of a photo story, do you have tips for determining where to pitch a story and how to get an editor's attention?
Well, I think it kind of goes back into the 3 A's where you really want to think about, okay, I made this story. Who do I need to get it in front of to have an impact? And so when it comes to where to pitch your work, I always encourage people to think about not necessarily what they think might be the obvious fit of a publication, or the publication that might be the most glorious to have their photos in. Like, we all think, oh my gosh, well, we want it in National Geographic, or we want it in, some giant publication. But really think about what publication has the audience that needs to see your story most to have that impact, and shaping your story or your pitch to really fit that publication. And I really encourage people who want to make an impact with their images to think beyond nature publications, because we really, in conservation, we want to get stories out to people who are beyond the choir, the quote unquote choir. So what are some out of the box publications that might be a great fit for this story? Or how I think Anne is a rock star at this. I can't wait for her section coming up, where she really thinks about, like, where do I want this story to go? And it might be outside the box. It might be not necessarily where a nature photographer would immediately think to put their work. And then she reaches a larger audience that way who really needs to hear that conservation message. So I guess my tip, the biggest tip that I could give to anyone is, as you're looking for where your story needs to go, think about who needs to see it, and think outside the box of your typical nature or wildlife or conservation magazines. What even mainstream magazines might be a perfect fit for that story?
That's a big piece of it right there. And I looking forward to the second half when we start talking about all of that. And again, how do you get an editor's attention? How do you focus? Where do you go? Where do you turn to, and how do you get there? Before we do all that stuff, can we talk a little bit about gear? What kind of gear do you use, and what do you recommend for beginners who are going out to do this kind of work?
Yeah. So I shoot with a Canon 1DX Mark II, and so it's a kind of an older camera, but I love it. It's my trusty dear friend. But I am really excited to upgrade when I can to a mirrorless system. So I'm excited about the Canon R5. I'm excited about smaller, lighter, especially being able to carry around heavy equipment. I'm getting older. I wouldn't mind something smaller, lighter, easier to use. But when it comes to what I recommend for my students, I am a big believer that it's really about the photographer, not the gear, when it comes to making images. And so whatever you have on hand, just start using that to create stories. A lot of my students worry that their equipment isn't good enough to create photo stories, or that, they have to upgrade their gear. But what I recommend is, as they're deciding what they want to create, and that's going to help guide them toward more specialized equipment, just rent first. Rent the equipment that you need, experiment with it, figure out if that's really something that you want to have for sure, or if it's something that maybe you just need for a short-term shoot. And then if it's something that really needs to be part of your kit, then go to B&H and buy it.
Good point. Jayme, are there any particular lenses that you find your students gravitate to, or you suggest to your students to make their work stand out?
Yeah. So there's kind of two different, not camps, I'd say, but kind of two different routes that a lot of students tend to go. And one is toward insect photography and one is toward bird photography. And that's, of course, not universal, but I see two kind of big trends that way. And so when it comes to insect photography, one of the just really fun ways to photograph kind of storytelling shots with insects is to use a wide angle macro lens. And so I really love the Sigma 15 millimeter fisheye for that purpose. But I also, when it comes to photographing birds, I recommend telephotos just because it's really difficult to get amazing bird photography on the go if you don't have a telephoto lens. But in order to have the most range possible and to be able to kind of get away with having one lens versus multiple lens, I always suggest a telephoto in whatever range people can get. So whether that's a 70 to 300 or a 100 to 400, I adore my Canon 100 to 400. It's just so versatile. It's small, it's light. I love everything about it. So I tend to recommend for my students who really want to get into bird photography, that telephoto zoom lens that's in a really nice range is always going to, you're never going to go wrong with that.
What about maximum apertures? Do you have recommendations on that? Because again, you could buy a lot of these variable zooms that have a great range, but the light fall off works against you. So what's your recommendation on that? What's the smallest aperture you should go and use?
It's hard to say. I mean, depending on the lens that you get, it might have like a 5.6 might be the best one, or 3.5, f3.5. So I really love to be able to shoot in low light situations, and I love shallow depth of field. So I really if you can get your hands on an f4, that would be ideal. But even so, I'd say 5.6, like f5.6. If you can get a lens that at least has that, you're going to do fine.
Yeah. And again, you were talking about weight earlier, and the weight difference between a lens that has a maximum aperture of, say, f2.8 and the same focal length with a maximum aperture of f4, which is one stop, could be 1/3 smaller and lighter than the 2.8 version. And that could be a big factor depending on your age, your physicality, and how much hauling you're going to do in one day.
Absolutely. It's incredible the difference that makes in size and weight, for sure. And when you're a wildlife photographer, a nature photographer, taking your whole kit out into the field, that's a huge consideration.
Yes.
So I love equipment that is more flexible, more lightweight. It might not seem as fancy or high quality, but you can do so much with it, and it fits the style of work that we do.
Just curious, what style of camera bag do you like taking out when you're out doing this kind of work? Do you look a messenger shoulder, or do you prefer a backpack?
I love Mindshift gear. Their bags are just amazing. And so I have 3 different sizes of Mindshift, and I use their backpacks.
Okay.
I prefer backpack over messenger bag because, especially when you have a lot of heavy equipment in your bag, I find that the messenger style just puts too much strain on one shoulder.
Yeah.
And so I prefer backpacks, especially backpacks that have the hip belt, so that you can put a lot of the weight distribution on your waist and not on your shoulders. And then your shoulders don't get so exhausted, because usually I'm carrying my backpack, plus in my hands is my camera and a heavy lens. And so the less strain I can put on my shoulders, the better.
And your balance is better with a backpack too.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we're going to have more with Anne Readel and conservation photography. Great conversation. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app, or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website, and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
We are back. Anne Readel is an amazing human being, okay? She's another one of those attorneys who saw the light and got a camera. It's amazing. In like 3 years, she's gone from like taking magnifying glasses in front of our smartphone and actually going out and getting assignments, and more important, selling stories of her own. And that's an amazing thing to do, especially in such a short period of time. Anne Readel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Jill, for having me.
Great to have you here. So to start off, you only started working with a full-fledged camera in 2019. And again, you started with your phone, which is what a lot of us do, and some of us are going back to it. What camera and lenses did you get, and how did you decide on the brand and model? Just to get started on that, we were just talking about gear a few minutes ago.
Sure. Well, I am a Sony user. When I first started looking into cameras, I really liked Sony's mirrorless system, and particularly they had this great entry-level camera called the Sony A6000.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first camera I purchased. And I put a big plug in for that. It was a wonderful camera. I've had pictures published with that camera. So since that time, I upgraded to full frame, and I now shoot with a Sony A1 and Sony A7R4. That being said, I still use my crop sensor camera. It's a great camera for anyone listening.
When do you switch to that camera? Just out of curiosity, because the other cameras you have are serious heavy-duty cameras, and not to knock the 6000. A lot of people own them and use them and take great pictures. Why do you defer to that camera at times? Just curious.
Yeah, I depending on where I'm shooting, I sometimes actually like to have 3 camera bodies and lenses set up. And so it is still I still use it. It's also tiny. It is tiny. It's light. I sometimes throw on a 20 millimeter pancake lens, and I throw it in my jacket pocket.
And that would be like a 30 millimeter lens.
Exactly.
Right.
That can go anywhere. And, even though I've got some full frame bodies, I was recently in Mongolia, and I was in some situations where we were in and out of boats and things were really hectic. And I ended up just throwing that little crop sensor camera with a 20 millimeter pancake lens in my pocket. I could shoot when I can. I wasn't too worried about it, and about lugging a lot of camera gear around. So anyway, I would say use the equipment you have.
Yeah, and don't take more than you need, okay? Because if your stuff's going to slow you down, you're better off shedding gear, I always say, than carry too much. But that's just my little thing. What lenses do you use on your full frame cameras? What focal lengths are you dealing with?
Sure, I have 3 primary lenses that are kind of my go-to lenses. The first is a wide angle lens. It's a 12 to 24 millimeter Sony lens. It may be my favorite lens. I absolutely love that lens. I also use a 24 to 105 millimeter lens. It's kind of my workhorse. If I'm using the full frame body and I have one lens that I can take for kind of general work, that's what I do. And then I've got a telephoto. So like Jayme, I have a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, but the Sony version. I should mention too, I do a lot of macro work, and I also use the Sony 90 millimeter lens, and also, as Jayme mentioned, that excellent Sigma 15 millimeter fisheye lens for wide angle macro.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And by the way, just a little tip for anybody who has a real wide angle lens that does not focus terribly close. There is something wonderful about getting in ridiculously close with an ultra wide or a real wide angle lens. And you can do that quite often simply by just getting an extension tube, like an 8 millimeter extension tube that works with your camera system. And that puts you in like right on top of your subject. And you're right, the perspective you get is just phenomenal. I find it to be just really dynamic to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I think when you start getting into macro photography, it's a bit addicting because you see things that you can't see with the naked eye, and you're pretty amazed. I mean, I look at the back of my camera and I say, "Oh, that's a nice shot," and then you pull it up and you said, "Wow, I had no idea that was there."
Anne, I wanted to ask, how soon after getting your mirrorless gear did you discover Jayme's conservation photography course?
I had my mirrorless gear for about 2 years before meeting Jayme. So I was enjoying taking pictures, kind of similar to Jayme's story. I love taking pictures. I was pretty happy with the images I was taking, but I wanted to do something more. And I really wanted to start telling conservation stories with the images and also getting those stories published. The problem was I had no idea how to do that. I found Jaymi's course by Googling, and I took her course about a year ago. So that was 2 years after getting the gear. And I ended up having my first story published a few months after that.
That's amazing.
That's pretty good.
What was it about the direction that sort of allowed you to get to the goal line with your work and get it published?
Sure. So I think what I appreciate about Jaymi's course is that it really lays out step by step what to do. I mean, it's everything from what sort of images to take, how to take those images and put together a story, how to plan that story, and then also ultimately how to pitch the story. And so that step-by-step approach really helped me not only see story potential with the images I've already taken, but also plan stories then into the future.
Interesting. And isn't there a community aspect to Jaymi's organization? Did that factor in at all?
Yeah, that's really helpful. There's an online course that you can take as your at your own pace, but you also have a lot of one-on-one interaction with Jaymi and other students, which is really invaluable. I mean, Jaymi has really become a mentor towards me. The course gives you the opportunity to ask her questions directly. She has monthly calls where you can, we have in-depth discussions on questions, in-depth discussion on projects that other people are working on, and you can really lean on other students to get feedback. So, I've got a couple stories that I'm working on. I've shared some images from those stories to get feedback from the community. I've been working on a story, and before I went to shoot, I put my shot list out there. I tried to get other people to help me brainstorm on other ways I could tell my story through pictures. So that aspect has also been really helpful. Even in this year following taking the course, to really hone the stories I'm currently working on.
Here's a question for you now. You're a former field biologist, and now you work with scientists and photographer. Do you have any tips for like turning this raw data into pictures that make a difference?
Yeah, so I think that it always helps to take a step back. You might look at a figure, you hear some data, and I always take a step back and say, well, what does that mean? Why did that pique my interest? What emotion did that raise in me or might raise in others? And I think that that's a great place to start. Is this data or are these facts that kind of raise hope? Do they sound a warning? What do they do? And I try to keep that in mind when I'm thinking about the pictures I want to take to convey whatever kind of scientific message is out there that I want to tell. And then, I do try to work with scientists and specifically scientists doing field work. And if when I have that opportunity, I try to think about, you know, let's say there's a figure. Well, there's data that went into creating that figure, and that data was collected by people that had goals, that faced challenges in the field. I'm trying to kind of harness that emotion, harness what they were doing to be able to create that figure, trying to think about the details of what that means. Like, what are they doing in the field? What sort of, what do they have to do to collect that data? And trying to identify the details of that might make people pause, that might make people look at the picture and become more interested in the story.
Interesting. I don't know. I don't know where this question goes, but sometimes you start off with a goal and then you take the pictures to meet the goal, to meet your expectations. Does this come into it at all? Like, I could see this sort of photography where you're trying to make a point, be it pro or con, but depending on how you use your camera, how you edit the image, you could further influence what the photograph is saying. Have you ever seen situations where people have actually taken it and like kind of like bent the parameters a little bit to make their point a little bit more obvious?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a little bit goes back to, what Jaymi was saying, and I'll just say just personally, trying to have an idea of the action. that you want as a result of the story. And that definitely influences how you take your images. So you mentioned No-Mow May earlier in the show, and that was a story focusing on pollinator conservation and just trying to get people to not mow during the month of May so that those lawn flowers can actually, or the lawn weeds can flower and bees can, have something to eat in the spring. And so if my goal was actually just tell people about this growing movement and hopefully they just stop mowing their lawn. And so with that goal, kind of that action in mind, it really influenced the pictures I took. It influenced how I talked to people, the characters I had in the story. And I think the story could have been much different if I didn't have that action identified in the first place. Conservation can be just stepping back and not doing things. And there's a lot you can do for pollinators by just mowing your lawn higher.
So, Anne, your No-Mow May story was first published by the New York Times World Through a Lens column, but then that sort of went viral and it gave you the opportunity to pitch the story to different magazines. How did you approach recasting the story or reaching out to those other magazines to expand its impact?
I think it was largely paying attention to what was happening. So the No-Mow May story was published, and I was thrilled that it was being shared by different groups. People were talking about it, and I started getting a lot of emails from readers that had questions. And the No-Mow May story in the New York Times covered kind of the rise of this movement and its spread. And I couldn't put everything about No-Mow May in this story, and there were some legitimate questions that came up. And looking at those questions, I was able to put them in kind of two buckets. One bucket was more of a how-to, like how do I bring No-Mow May to my own community? And the other bucket was a little bit more environmental focused on what are the environmental impacts of No-Mow May, and letting these, sometimes lawn weeds like dandelions actually grow in your yard. And so with that in mind and knowing, what my desired action was to get people to know about this movement and to try to adopt it themselves, I started to consider what audience I might be able to approach with these two different kind of potential follow-up stories. And I ended up approaching Better Homes and Gardens that published kind of a how-to piece about No-Mow May. And then the more environmental piece was published by Sierra Magazine. And those were both published about a month after the original story came out.
That's a great point about the different angles, how to versus more environmental and so on.
Something I'm curious about is that, and again, I'm asking this because you've managed to make really good headway in a short period of time, a lot quicker and a lot further than most photographers do, because it's not easy to make it as a photographer these days. Everybody's taking pictures. What recommendation would you make? What kind of a tip would you give to somebody who has a good idea? How do you present that to your potential audience or client to make it sell?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and this is just early in the process, I pay a lot of attention to what gets me excited. I try to test that idea. I'll talk to friends and family about the potential story and see if they're excited about it too, and that can give me idea if it might have legs. So I think just early on sharing your ideas, which going back to Jayme's community can be really helpful. But also, I think thinking about again, what's the action, what's the audience, and trying to figure out what sort of story that you can tell to a particular audience that either needs to hear it, wants to hear it, might get excited about it. I think it's really trying to pay attention to how and where you craft your stories. I mean, as you said, that there's stories everywhere that you can tell. So there's no shortage of stories to tell, but pick one that you're excited about, that you think other people are excited about, and then figure out where and how to tell that story.
Given that a lot of the news coverage that we see about the environment tends to have a negative spin, do you have any tips for crafting stories with a more positive message?
Yes, I think people want to hear positive stories, and I think editors also do want to publish positive stories. One example of this was the first story I had published by Audubon, which was about urban turkeys. And I was living with urban turkeys. They were right outside my doorstep. I personally love them. I started reading about them, and I realized apparently a lot of people don't like them. And most of the stories I saw that were published were pretty negative. And so I ended up writing a very positive spin on kind of how to live with your turkey neighbors, and Audubon published that. So I do think there are a lot of opportunities to publish positive news stories.
All right. Well, we are at the end of another great show here, and it's really been wonderful speaking with both of you, Jaymi Heimbuch and Anne Readel, and a very interesting topic and interesting ways of going about getting pictures that matter out there. Jaymi, people want to catch up on your work. Where should they go?
Well, they can go to conservationvisuals.com. That is where my course lives. And I also have a podcast as well, so they can catch episodes there. And then some of my photography lives on my own website, jaymiheimbach.com.
Okay. And again, all of this is going to be in our show notes. So if you didn't jot it down, it'll be there. Anne Readel, yourself, where can we catch up on what you're up to? And you're up to a lot these days.
Yes, I also have a photography website. It's annereadel.com. So you can check out the work and the projects I am working on there.
Definitely. And again, all the links will be in our show notes. Anyway, thank you both for joining us. If you are a fan of the show, but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests and show notes. And please join us on Facebook, where you can share your favorite pictures and leave comments about the show. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of Jill Waterman and Jason Tables, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.